With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right, even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Periscope, however you're joining us on this Friday. We certainly do appreciate you listening to us. And since it is a Friday and this portion will probably get used on the best of if you're listening to us on the terrestrial signal on News Radio 1440. We certainly appreciate you listening to us, even if you happen to not be joining us live. But as the intro said, this is Tactics. I am Caleb Colquitt, and this is where speech isn't hatred, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. That is sort of our mantra here at Tactics, and as always, because there are no exceptions to this, local news takes first priority, so we'll get into that right away. You remember that we talked about, and I kind of honestly just sort of mentioned it in passing, I don't even think that I gave it its own segment, that we mentioned earlier this week that we had found out in the wake of those horrific shootings that took place in El Paso, Texas, and in Dayton, Ohio, that it turns out one of the Democrat presidential hopefuls was actually fundraising off of this, using the death of her countrymen to be able to try to benefit and put funds together. And we found out, I think that I saw a story somewhere that Beto O'Rourke had done the same thing. But Elizabeth Warren, we found out, was definitely fundraising and specifically sort of saying, okay, these horrible shootings took place. You need to get me in the White House, and we need to fundraise off of this idea. I mean, it was absolutely detestable and sickening. And the fact that the Democrats are trying to use this to say, basically, if you elect me, then there will be no more mass shootings. We'll solve that problem. It's also not only despicable and disgusting, it's also completely illogical. If you may remember, we had quite a few mass shootings during the Obama years. Even when the Democrats were controlling the House and the Senate, mass shootings were still taking place. And this narrative that they've been trying to drive, that, well, the reason that they're happening now and they're happening in more frequency, which, by the way, if you look at the statistics, that's not true either. But the reason that they're happening now and the reason this is getting ratcheted up is because now what we're having is white supremacists come out of the woodwork, and the president and his rhetoric are emboldening them to come out. Now, I've said for a while, and I was one of the first people critical of Trump on this, that he did a terrible job in handling some of the alt-right, that side of it. He's gotten a lot better and hasn't talked about that since then. I think that he learned from his mistakes. But he certainly didn't endorse, but he sort of did this winking and nodding thing that he did with the alt-right, because I think what he was figuring is, well, whether or not I actually agree with these people politically, they're going to be useful. And I think that he realized, A, that's not even true, that they'll be politically useful to me, and B, even if they are, it's not worth the cost. So that's what's going on. And you may also remember that we also had white supremacists committing mass shootings during the Obama years too. We had the church in South Carolina that got shot up, for example. And so it is an odd thing to fundraise off the idea that, well, once a Democrat is in the White House, then these mass shootings just go away. And so you really need to give me money so that I can get elected so that we can make mass shootings vanish. That's beyond asinine. And anybody that has a memory that goes back more than, about 2 years will realize that. So the interesting thing about this, though, and this is sort of the local angle that we didn't know about, is that not only was Elizabeth Warren actually fundraising off of these tragedies, she was doing so on the behalf of Senator Doug Jones. So I'll go ahead and read the email that was sent out, because first of all, the email, and I'm going to read a portion of it, but it goes into this whole thing about how she's touting gun regulation and how that's going to be the solution to mass shootings, which is incorrect on a number of levels. And we've gone over that subject matter over and over and over again. You can look through a lot of my old footage that I have highlighted on the Tactics YouTube page. You can check that out. So if you ever are curious about that, I go into great detail in a lot of those segments, but we'll deal with what's right in front of us right now. So Elizabeth Warren sent this thing out, and she said, "We need common sense gun reform now before the next mass shooting to stop the daily gun violence on our streets and to make sure that our families and loved ones are safe." I mean, that is detestable on a number of levels. Like I said, it makes no sense whatsoever that the Democrats are trying to make this case that if we just put forward the common sense gun regulation, then it'll go away. Yeah, do you remember Columbine? Columbine took place during the assault weapons ban. And there were other mass shootings that took place during the assault weapons ban. And Democrats are saying now that, well, if we just do it this time, this will work. It doesn't make any sense, but what's even more disgusting about this is there's not an ounce of truth to it. But even if they were, they're saying that this is going to stop the gun violence on our streets. So this is implying not only if we put gun regulation into effect, if you just put our common sense gun regulation into effect, not only is it going to stop mass shootings, it's also going to stop the daily gun crimes and mass shootings. There's not an ounce of truth to that. I mean, you look at America comparatively to other countries that don't have a Second Amendment, that have extremely strict gun regulation, and the homicide rate remains pretty much the same. In fact, we're lower than several countries that have much stricter gun regulation, like Mexico or Russia. Again, I'm not going to go into great detail on these. I'm just kind of giving you the view from 20,000 feet. If you want those stats, if you want those charts, I do them in other segments. Feel free to look on YouTube and check those out. Typically, if you search for Tactics Radio gun regulation or something like that, you'll probably come up with it. But anyway, so she is actually suggesting you should give money because if I get elected, then gun violence is gone. That's so absurd, and it's also infuriating when the Democrats are always the one accusing Republicans of being the fear-mongers, saying that Republicans are trying to scare you into voting for them, and they give you this dark vision of America, and they're trying to scare people into voting. Yeah, saying in an email that, well, to keep your friends and family safe, then you're going to have to vote for me and give me money. I mean, that's what she's saying. And make sure our families and loved ones are safe. I mean, in a roundabout sense, it's almost like she is suggesting that your friends and family are not going to be safe from gun violence unless you give me money. That sounds almost like a threat. So it's beyond the pale. It's completely immoral. But the twist is that Doug Jones is included in this. So the email ends with, "Will you chip in today to help Democrats flip the Senate? Your donation will be split among funds that will go to eventual Democrat Senate nominees in 23 races and Senators Doug Jones and Tina Smith." So there it is, right there in Elizabeth Warren's fundraising email, saying that you got to vote for us, because if you don't vote for us, then your friends and family are going to be in danger from gun violence. It's absolutely disgusting. And then Doug Jones is somebody that is specifically mentioned by name by Elizabeth Warren in this email. Now, I do want to give some context and some perspective. Is it fair to hold Doug Jones accountable for this? No. For all we know, Doug Jones had no part in this. He is not the person that wanted his name in this email. He's not the one that made the decision to paint the gun situation like this. So the raw text of the email, I don't think it's fair to say, okay, well, Doug Jones is a bad person and Doug Jones is fundraising off of the tragic deaths of these people in Ohio and El Paso. That's not fair to say. And I'm not saying that. I don't want anybody to mistake me from saying that. But he is included and mentioned by name. So let's unpack that. He's not the one that made this decision, but he is included in it. Why is that? Well, you have to think about it this way. Doug Jones may not be the one that's deciding this, but he is keeping sleazy company. He is buddying up to people like Elizabeth Warren, like Chuck Schumer, like, as it's mentioned in this email, Tina Smith. He is firmly in the Democrat camp, which is also hilarious because you'll remember that when he was running in the state of Alabama, and I'm going to say this till I'm blue in the face, he was constantly saying, I'm going to be my own person. I'm not going to be just lockstep with the Democrats on everything. I'm going to go my own way. I'm going to represent the values of Alabama. It was a huge lie. And anybody that was paying attention knew that it was a huge lie. And we can see that in his voting record. He has been much more of a Democratic socialist type, much more of an Elizabeth Warren, toe the line, Chuck Schumer. He's been far more that than he has been a moderate blue dog Democrat. And that's just a fact. Look at the stats. Look at his voting record. So at the very least, we can say you can't pin this on Doug Jones, but you can say he's keeping really sleazy company. And typically, I think that it's a wise adage that you will know a man by knowing his friends. If there is somebody that keeps company with somebody that is willing to do this, that is morally depraved enough to use the deaths of innocent victims to try to bolster their campaign by fundraising on it, you can at least question Doug Jones' character in choosing to associate with Elizabeth Warren, even if you don't attribute her action directly to him. And that also brings up a secondary concern. Is Doug Jones really anti-gun? Is he really anti-Second Amendment? Well, Elizabeth Warren seems to think so. She thinks so much she is willing to campaign on and fundraise on the idea that Doug Jones will be such a reliable vote to take away your guns that she is willing to put him in a fundraising letter to bolster that. To say, we got to have Doug Jones vote. And so because of that, your money that you're going to donate to me is going to go to help get people like Doug Jones elected. So Elizabeth Warren believes he's firmly in the anti-gun camp. And Warren, keep in mind, has sponsored and supported bills to, for example, limit magazine capacity to 10 bullets. This is something that Elizabeth Warren has done. I keep a handgun on me. And it's not a huge gun. I mean, it's not a smaller handgun. It's not a compact. But I keep a Heckler & Koch P30 on me. And it holds 14. Well, 13 and 1 in the chamber. So my gun, under Elizabeth Warren's new law, my regular pistol, my sidearm, that I keep on me all the time to keep myself safe, that's automatically banned. I wouldn't be able to buy a new magazine for my firearm if Elizabeth Warren's policies were to be enacted. So, I mean, this is what we're looking at. This is the kind of person Warren is. She also voted to extend the assault weapons ban, which we showed whether you're looking at mass shootings or whether you're looking at just regular on-the-street gang-level crime. It had no effect whatsoever on crime. None. And we did it for a decade, and it still had no effect on crime that you could look at through the stats. And apparently, this being her agenda, her wanting to ban certain guns, wanting to ban certain types of magazines, being as anti-gun as she is, she believes that Doug Jones is at the very least similar enough to her to be a reliable vote to try to get this anti-gun legislation through. So much so that she's saying to her supporters, hey, this is a guy we can trust on this. We need to get him reelected. So whether or not you think Jones is anti-gun, Elizabeth Warren is certainly confident in his anti-gun stances. And that's so hilarious, too, because you remember that Doug Jones specifically ran ads to try to put the idea inside you that he's not an anti-gun guy. You remember those ads where he was walking along in sort of hunting gear, and he had a shotgun strapped across his back. Well, not strapped across, he was just kind of carrying it. And that whole thing was crafted in such a way to make you think, okay, he's a blue dog Democrat. He's kind of a Dixiecrat. He's not really one of these far left socialist Democrat nut jobs But Elizabeth Warren apparently believes that he absolutely is, so much so she is willing to tell her supporters that they need to give money to him because she's so confident in his anti-gun stance. And you'll remember also the very first speech that Doug Jones made, the very first one when he got to the Senate, was a long anti-gun rant that was straight out of the Democrats' playbook. This guy is not a moderate when it comes to guns. But look, when you're Doug Jones and these are your allies, this guy has shown time and time and time and time again, if he has to choose between the Democrats in Washington and the people of Alabama doing what they want and doing what you want, he chooses them every single time. He doesn't even really have to think about it. If he's got a choice, okay, I can do what the Democrats in D.C. do, or I can do what the people in Alabama want me to do, he always goes with D.C. He always goes with the left. It's never even a thought for him. That's the kind of person Doug Jones is, and I cannot wait for him to be out of office in 2020, which I am very much, I'm incredibly optimistic now that Roy Moore has seemed to take a pretty serious dip in the primary polls, that Doug Jones absolutely will be gone in 2020. And speaking of all these shootings, just a real quick update. We won't go into a ton of detail on this, but I do think that it's important to mention. We had a potential mass shooting that was actually averted in a Missouri Walmart. So you may recall that over the past week or so, we had, not, this past week, and I know it's Friday, I'm saying the week before this week, that within that span of about 7 days, we had 4 mass shootings, and 2 of them occurred in Walmarts, which was also really strange because, you're accustomed to seeing mass shootings, unfortunately, when you see stories about them, they typically occur in places like malls, or they'll occur in places like a school, unfortunately. But here they're taking place in a Walmart, which we really hadn't seen before, and it was really odd to see 2 of them back to back like that. Which, by the way, there is research, and actually I shared a document about this, a news story about a new study that shows that mass shootings absolutely are contagious. And we saw that play out in that week, is that once you saw one mass shooting, you had another one, and it seems that the 2 were inspired by one another. So there's this guy who decides that he's going to go into a Walmart there in Missouri, and he is decked out. He's wearing the body armor. He also has a rifle strapped to his back, walks in to the Walmart, and then a concealed carry fireman, off-duty fireman, sees him and then holds him up and holds him there until the authorities arrive and arrest him. So it seems to be like a story. Now, I don't know if it was actually preventing a mass shooting, and that's the thing about these things. There are stories like this where average citizens that happen to have firearms, and you'll remember that the CDC did that study that showed there was about 3 to 5 times more defensive use of firearms than there were uses of firearms to hurt another person, in other words, to commit a crime. 3 to 5 times more per year. And that's the CDC, which is not exactly a bastion of conservative thought. There's no telling how many stories like that occur every day in America, where a regular citizen that happens to be armed stops a mass shooting. You never hear about those because they don't have 9 or 10 people dead, and thank God that's the case. But if you're looking at that, and if we're going by the rubric, if we're going by the stat that the CDC said, and I know that this isn't a one-to-one comparison, but if it's anywhere similar to the CDC's findings, that means for every mass shooting we have 3 to 5 that are averted by a regular citizen using a concealed carry. Well, I mean, it may be open carry too, I don't know. But either way, a defensive use of a firearm that they own, using it the correct way, the way that it was intended. And so this is at least a potential mass shooting that was averted. Now, when the police officer spoke to him afterward, turns out that the guy is actually somebody that considers himself a conservative and a Second Amendment advocate. And he was going into Walmart not to hurt anybody, but to make a point. Which, first of all, I kind of see what he's saying in the sense that, well, if we just walked around like this all the time, people wouldn't freak out. But here's the thing. There is a difference in something being legal and something being permitted and something that you ought to do. And especially when there was a mass shooting that happened in the past week where a guy with a rifle and body armor went into specifically a Walmart and shot and killed innocent people. This is about the worst possible timing you could have. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than this. And I've always said that part of our responsibility as concealed carriers or firearms people, advocates of it, is that we need to exercise common sense and decorum. So yes, we carry, sometimes we carry open, sometimes we carry concealed, but either way, we try to convey an air that we are not threatening to people. I get that it may not be fair that people will see somebody with a rifle on their back that just happens to be carrying it and automatically get a little freaked out. But here's the thing, whether or not it's fair, you have to recognize that there are people that do that. I've told people for a long time, I can still carry for the comfort of other people, not my own. I do it as a consideration to them because I don't want them to be afraid of me. I don't want them to, even though I wouldn't hurt a fly, I don't want them to believe that I would hurt them and automatically put them off before they even get a chance to know me. I would rather people not know that I'm carrying, get to know me, realize that I'm a nice, kind, even-tempered person, and then years later go, oh, I had no idea that he carried. See, that does a lot more to change a person's perspective and to change a person's idea of what a gun advocate is than somebody that just, yep, I'm going to walk around and just carry my shotgun around. You're not changing hearts and minds that way. You're, to use the Bible's phraseology, your speech is not being seasoned with salt at that point. You're not trying to make your message palatable to other people. Now, are people overly jumpy about it? Yeah, absolutely. But whether or not they're overly jumpy about it, you're not going to tamp that down by pulling a stunt like this. And here's the thing. Even though on a normal day, I would say maybe people overreacted a little bit, you're really going to go into the same store, obviously a different location, but the same store that a mass shooter just a few days before this went to, decked out in all of full body armor, exactly the way he was, and walk in and tell me that, oh, everybody should have been fine with it? Heck no. Because since these mass shootings happened, and because, like I said, mass shootings tend to be contagious, they tend to happen in clusters. Ever since the news of these mass shootings happened, I've been on high alert. As somebody that carries, I've been on high alert. And obviously this guy who concealed carry in Missouri, which thank God for him and other concealed carry people, especially considering that he's a first responder, an off-duty first responder, but a first responder nonetheless. Just like me, this guy saw somebody like this after hearing the news and knowing what happened in El Paso and knowing what happened in Dayton, even though El Paso was the Walmart one. I mean, he looks at that and goes, oh gosh, it's happening again. I need to take action. And he did. And thank God he did so in a way that there was no bloodshed or no misunderstanding. And he held the guy until the authorities arrived. But even a rational concealed carrier like myself or like this guy sees that directly after a mass shooting fitting that exact MO. Well, of course we look at that and think that something's going on. Even somebody that isn't afraid of guns looks at that and goes, whoa, something needs to happen here. I need to do something. That's reasonable. And so I think that this was a really, really dumb stunt. I actually heard that a liberal activist actually called in a shooting threat to try to make a point on the other side. Can we all just agree that this is a really bad time to try to pull a stunt? Like, even though I think that this is a bad idea no matter what time it is, and I've laid that case out, right after a mass shooting seems like a really dumb time to try to make a political statement about this kind of stuff. Wait until it's cooled down a bit and then try to make your political statement. Don't do it right afterward where people are understandably more cautious than normal. But in other local news, moving off of the shooting thing for a minute, there is something that I would like to contrast with the horrific train wreck of a senator that we have right now, Doug Jones. John Merrill has recently been appointed as a leader in the Secretary of State organization. So you may or may not realize this, but there are a lot of different organizations for constitutional officers in different states. For example, there is a sort of a fraternal brotherhood or sisterhood, I guess as the case may be, if you happen to have a female AG, for attorney generals across the country. And so this is something that's kind of a common thing. Well, in the Secretary of State's organization, of course, which John Merrill is a member of, he has recently been awarded a leadership position at that particular organization. So here's the headline. Here's the article I'm reading this from. Alabama Secretary of State John H. Merrill was recently named co-chair of the National Association of Secretaries of State, NASS, International Relations Committee. Quote, I look forward to strengthening the U.S. alliances alongside my colleagues on the International Relations Committee, and am honored to continue my service to the people of the great state of Alabama in this capacity, Merrill said. So a couple quick things from this. This is a really good look for the state of Alabama. I don't know how often we've had secretaries of state in similar leadership capacities, but John Merrill is somebody that is respected not just from people in Alabama, but across the country. And this is one more example of that. And I don't know how many people from out of state I had talking about what a amazing Secretary of State we have, and we do. When the whole thing was going on and John Merrill was on TV an awful lot for the voter fraud discussion, where they were talking about whether or not the Russians hacked in or whether or not voter suppression was taking place, all of those different stories. Merrill got actually quite a bit of media time, and it's easy to see why. He's sharp, he's confident, and he's not afraid of anybody. And when he was pushed back on, when people in the media were asking him questions, people that obviously even had some animosity towards him or believed that he wasn't telling the truth, he just, matter of fact, gave his statement, explained with facts and statistics, explained by how what they were saying was not true, and then moved on. And that's exactly the way that he should have handled it. And other people, even outside our own state, are recognizing his leadership ability. This is also incredibly impressive because Secretary of State is something that's kind of universal. I mean, every state has one, like the Attorney General. And so because of that, you've got all of them represented here. And specifically, the NASS is the oldest nonpartisan public officials group in America. I didn't know that. I figured surely it was the Governors Association. But I guess the Governors Association isn't bipartisan, because I know that there's a Republican governors and Democrat governors. But apparently, and I thought this was really cool, the organization for the Secretaries of State, theirs is the oldest nonpartisan or bipartisan, however you want to say it, organization of public officials in the country. So congratulations, John Merrill. And here's my question. And I haven't decided exactly who I'm going to vote for senator. But I mean, come on. After seeing this, you can't tell me you can't see this guy heading, for example, a committee at the Senate. I don't know which committee he'd necessarily be great on, but right here, one of the things that's being talked about is that one of his areas of expertise is international relations. You can't tell me that John Merrill wouldn't be phenomenal at that job as a senator. And I'd love to see it. I don't know if John Merrill, he seems to be the guy that I would probably vote for now if I had to vote today. But the guy is making the state of Alabama look really good, and he's doing it by actually representing our values, as opposed to Doug Jones, who is making Alabama infamous, especially amongst conservatives elsewhere in the country. I mean, this guy's going places, and I can't wait to see where he ends up. It would not surprise me at all to see him not only as our senator, but as a vocal senator, somebody that's in the media a lot, somebody that they go to for expertise, somebody that's a real leader amongst the senators, somebody more like a Ted Cruz figure. Or, now I'm not saying values-wise like this, but Somebody that was more like somebody that was more like a Schumer or a Mitch McConnell, somebody that is seen as a leader in the Senate, not necessarily philosophically like those two, but you know what I'm saying. And so I think John Merrill would be phenomenal at that. Speaking of the Senate too, and this is kind of off topic, but you'll see where I'm going with this. Apparently, earlier today, Twitter had banned Mitch McConnell. So good old Cocaine Mitch, Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell actually got banned from Twitter, not for doing cocaine, surprisingly enough. You would think that, well, I don't know. There's an awful lot of people that do cocaine on Twitter. Quite a few. In fact, there's days that I wonder if most of the people on Twitter aren't doing cocaine. But Cocaine Mitch doing a line of cocaine and then getting banned from Twitter. So how this all started, Mitch McConnell had a group of insane people trespassing on his property and showing up to his personal house to try to terrify him and his children. And what he did was posted a video of the protesters. That's all that happened, and you can see a little snippet of it. This isn't the whole thing, obviously, because it's pretty long. But this is just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that was being said about Mitch McConnell on his lawn. Any second now.
Hopefully some mother out there with some voodoo dolls in these.
Yeah, you know somebody is. That's probably what it is. Just stab the mother in the heart, please.
All right, so I mean, again, that's just sort of a sampling of it, but you get the idea. These people are threatening Mitch McConnell, saying that he ought to be killed. I hope that somebody stabs him to death tonight. I mean, just horrific, evil stuff. So far beyond the pale of what constitutes good government and good politics in the United States to suggest that you not only want the person that you dislike out of power, but anyone that disagrees with you, they need to die. And so I don't have to explain why that's reprehensible. But what's crazy about this is that Mitch McConnell posts that video. Twitter blocks him for the content of the video, which Mitch McConnell wasn't advocating for violence or calling to violence. He's the subject of the video. If he were doing that, then he would be calling for violence against himself. He would be saying, hey guys, here's this video where people are suggesting that someone stab me in the heart. Stab me, please. How did... It amazes me that Twitter reached this conclusion. Now, granted, I'm not the biggest Cocaine Mitch fan. I think that anybody that has watched my show for any amount of time realizes how much I detest Mitch McConnell and wish he were out of office. I wouldn't even care if we had to lose his seat to a Democrat. I think even that would be preferable to having him as the Senate Majority Leader. And yet, when this happens, I've got to defend the guy. What's even more amazing about this is that Twitter allowed a hashtag Massacre Mitch, to trend. It was one of the highest trending hashtags of the day. Literally thousands upon thousands of people tweeting about it, actively calling for Mitch McConnell to be massacred. So that's okay. But Mitch McConnell posting a video of people saying that they want to kill him, we got to quash that right away. Here's what a lot of conservatives are taking it, and I think they're correct. Twitter hunts, actively looks for excuses to ban conservatives. When it comes to liberals and some of the things that they're saying, they'll let an awful lot go, but the second a conservative does anything that could even kind of be interpreted as being against their guidelines, they have to immediately ban them. I mean, we saw this with the debacle with the anti-Planned Parenthood movie, Unplanned. You remember that they were shadow banning them. They actually deleted their account at some point. That's why people don't trust big media, especially people on the right. Because junk like this seems to only happen to us. Massacre Mitch can actually be a hashtag tweeted by thousands of people trending on Twitter talking about killing Mitch McConnell. They do nothing to them, but the second Mitch McConnell posts a video of said people threatening him, oh, we've got to ban Mitch McConnell. What kind of warped worldview are you living in where that makes any kind of sense? And yet that's exactly what Twitter did. We all know that if, God forbid, this would happen, and to my knowledge it never did happen, God forbid this would happen to somebody like a Chuck Schumer, or like a Senator Mnuchin, like a Senator Feinstein, or, anybody on the left. If this had happened to President Obama when he was a senator, or Hillary Clinton, or so on and so forth, anybody on the left, if it had happened to a liberal, and they were posting videos of people saying they wanted to kill them, you can't tell me that Twitter would say, nope, got to get rid of that. Heck, if anything, they would probably bump it up so other people could see how nasty and evil conservatives are. They want to kill these people. Now, first of all, they don't usually have videos of that because it doesn't happen. Or if it has happened, it's not happened in nearly the volume that it has from people on the left doing this to people on the right. But it just absolutely astounds me because we all know that if this had happened in the reverse and a bunch of conservatives showed up at Senator Feinstein's house and talked about how much they'd like to stab her, and Feinstein posted a video of it, there's no way that Senator Feinstein would have got banned from Twitter. Nobody, no even somewhat rational, fair-minded person looks at that and says, yep, they would have banned Senator Feinstein for that. It wouldn't happen. And in response to this, the GOP decided to pull their ads. They decided to actually pull their ads off of Twitter because, of course, as a political body, they advertise with various media outlets, and Twitter happens to be one of them. The GOP immediately reacted to this and said, you know what? We're not even doing business with you people. You obviously have a very left-leaning bias. You're obviously out to get us. Why would we want to advertise with you? You know what? That's 100% fair. And normally speaking, I don't have I do have a problem with saying I can't do business with you because you disagree with me. This takes it to a whole other level. This is the people that are the business owners, the ones selling advertisement to the GOP, actively trying to tamp down their message. Well, if that's the case, then why would you want to advertise with them? Twitter has backed off and now restored Mitch McConnell's account, but the fact that this happened in the first place is just another glowing testament to the reason that people on the right do not trust big media. So what we'll do is we'll take a quick break and we'll be back in just a minute.
Hey, where you going? Champ? Slugger? Hey, cowboy. Where you going? Where you going?
I'm going out!
All right, here we are. So you guys remember last year, one of the things I talked about in a segment called Straw Wars is how the liberals, despite no scientific evidence or backing whatsoever, believe that somehow they are saving the sea life by banning plastic straws. In response to this, Mellow Mushroom has started giving out paper straws as opposed to plastic straws. So what we're going to do is we're going to see how effective the paper straws are with the most difficult drink to drink, a milkshake. Let's see how this stands up. All right, so first of all, I got about 2 sips out of that, and the paper stuck to my lips. This thing does not work too well. Boy, it'd take you 2 hours to drink this with this.
Well, see, I'm using plastic.
That's John from Millbrook, by the way. He's the one driving.
I think they use plastic because that's the best thing to use.
This thing sucks. Well, actually, it doesn't suck. If it sucked, I'd be fine with it, but it doesn't. This milkshake will melt before I finish this. All right. Experiment over. It's biodegradable. All right. We're going to fix this now. There we go. Good old petroleum-based plastic straws. Oh, that's so much better.
I got a question about this.
Oh yeah?
With the paper, aren't they concerned about the trees, having to cut down the trees to make the straws too? Is that not a...
Well, that's one of the points that I made. It doesn't matter what you make the straw out of. You're expending some kind of resource.
Well, yeah, because we all live here.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't matter what you make any product out of. You're expending some kind of resource. Mm-hmm. And that's true of straws or anything else. Well, I tell you this. Just based on this little experiment, I know that I saw that Disney is planning to go completely paper straw by 2020 on all their cruise lines and all of their amusement parks. I contend that Disney World is not the happiest place on earth if I can't drink a Dead Blame milkshake while I'm there.
But I will, to their defense, say one thing.
Oh?
You can take a pocket knife in. So help me.
That's something.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, so even though this went about the way I expected it to, paper straw experiment failed miserably. I imagine if I had left it in there much longer, it would have dissolved. I had a buddy the other day that went to a place that used paper straws. He said he had to order 6 different straws throughout the course of his meal because they kept dissolving on him. Which I'm sitting there thinking, you can't tell me that using 1 plastic straw is worse for the environment than 6 paper straws. I mean, that's just common sense. Anyway, all right, thanks guys. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my milkshake.
And welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today. So, some days the president does some stuff that I really like, some stuff that I really appreciate, whether it's an actual policy measure or it's just something that he does that, quite frankly, just amuses me. This was not one of those weeks. In fact, looking back at the week, especially, this was a very bad Trump week. If you got good Trump and bad Trump, this was definitely the bad Trump. This was the Mr. Hyde week for the president. And a couple reasons for that. First of all, Trump said that he was strongly considering commuting Governor Rod Blagojevich's 14-year prison sentence. Now, for those of you who don't remember Rod Blagojevich, he was the governor of Illinois. And he was the guy that was actually selling Senator Barack Obama's seat. So when Senator Barack Obama went on to become the president, well, his Senate seat was left vacant, and the governor is the one that got to appoint who the next senator would be. And so he was literally involved in a bidding war trying to sell the Senate seat to the highest bidder. I mean, that makes even LoveGov Robert Bentley look tame. I mean, don't get me wrong, as bad as Governor Bentley was using actual state resources to hide his affair, that's pretty bad. I don't think that it's actually worse than actively saying, hey, I've got this open Senate seat. Anybody that wants it, you can buy it for the low, low price of, however much that Blagojevich wanted for it. I mean, that's about as underhanded as it gets. And as horrible as what Governor Bentley did was, Blagojevich, that's an even bigger abuse of governor's powers, in my opinion. And so this guy is an absolute dirtbag. There's no other way to describe it, but because he was on The Apprentice with Trump for that one season, and Trump seems to really like him, he's saying, oh, this guy, you got a raw deal. It's just absurd that he would even contemplate doing this. But the thing is, and unfortunately this has been true of Trump's entire presidency, and I assume his entire life, the president just likes people based on whether or not he likes them personally or not, and he tends to use his power in such a way. Trump is the guy that really likes having the stick. And what I mean by that is, you remember the saying, walk softly and carry a big stick? Well, Trump really likes being the guy with the stick, and he likes using it. He likes stretching his legs. And so, as somebody that has the power of a presidential pardon, which is a power I frankly don't like anyone having, I think it's one of the very few things in the Constitution that I actually think should not be a thing. But because the president has the power of presidential pardon, he seems to want to exercise that every so often, and he seems to want to do it right now to commute Governor Blagojevich's sentence. And that's just such a dumb thing to do. And the only reason that Trump would presumably do such a thing is because he happens to like Blagojevich, which is an even dumber reason to do a dumb thing. It's a bad look for the president. It helps him with literally no one. I mean, I don't think that he's thinking this far ahead of it, honestly. But I guess you could kind of say that maybe Democrats will favor him for. I don't think so, though. I don't even think the establishment Democrats that knew Blagojevich and thought of him as an ally want anything to do with him now. And so this is just a really, really bad move by Trump. There's really no advantage to it whatsoever. It seems to be one of those Trump decisions that he just kind of makes on a whim and doesn't think about it before he does it. But as bad as that is, and that's bad, in my opinion, it is not nearly as bad or politically devastating, so morally or politically, as what happened in the ICU when he went to visit people in Ohio and in El Paso. Because the whole thing turned into a media circus. It basically was a mini Trump rally that took place in the hospital. And look, if he had just shown up, and he showed up with a camera crew, Trump can't necessarily, the guy can't control what the crowd does. Like, if Trump goes to a place, even if it's something like this that needs to be somber and serious, and he needs to adopt that mantle of presidential authority and wear the office in a respectable way, Trump can't necessarily affect how people react to that. If people show up and treat him like a celebrity and turn it into a Trump rally kind of thing, that's not really Trump's fault. How he reacts to it may or may not be his fault. Well, how he reacts to it is his fault. But I'm just saying that it could be good or bad. He controls his reaction. He doesn't control the crowd. But this was tweeted out by the president and pinned as his top tweet, so it would be the first thing people see on top of his Twitter feed, and you tell me how you react to it. This is the clip. Oh my gosh. That's not just a pile of crap. That is an entire mountain range of crap. The idea that the president of the United States would go to visit mass shooting victims is a good thing. But the fact that he turned it into a campaign event and a photo op, and specifically had camera crews go back later and put together a video montage like that, and then put it to the, like, what was that? I mean, I know it's not the Rocky theme, but it's similar to the Rocky music. It's this kind of upbeat jingle that they're trying to make it into, hey, we're taking care of it. No, that's about as bad as it could have been done. I mean, I don't know how it gets worse than that. And the reason is because Donald Trump made absolutely everything in that video about him. At a time where the country needed to see the president not trying to campaign, not trying to put all the spotlight and everything on him. The country needed that, and that's not what Trump gave them. He said, hey, look at me, everybody check me out, look at what I'm doing. And a lot of it has to do with the president seems utterly incapable of doing anything other than reacting to the media. Now, sometimes, I would even say maybe more often than not, reacting to the media is good because the media is so garbage that him repudiating the media typically gives us good results. This is not one of those cases because the media had been saying, oh, people don't like the president. They would rather he not show up. They're outside protesting. And so Trump's thinking was, all right, well, we'll show them. We'll stick it to them. What we're going to do is we're going to have a video put out there that shows everybody saying hi and high-fiving and glad to see me and asking for autographs. The whole thing was a reaction to the way that the media had been phrasing it. Now, was the media wrong in the way that they covered it? Absolutely, but that is a worse reaction. In fact, we talked at the top of the hour about Elizabeth Warren actually campaigning and fundraising off of the deaths of individuals, off of the deaths of people in mass shootings. How is that any different? How is that any better than what Elizabeth Warren did? Tell me, please. Because I don't see it as being any different at all. Now, granted, he's not asking for money at these things, but the sentiment is exactly the same. He shows up and he looks at it as nothing but a way to score political points, which is exactly what Elizabeth Warren did. And exactly what other Democrats have done. For those of you that are watching that are a little bit older, and you've noticed this phenomenon, this generational divide that we've seen not only reflected in polls, but reflected in individuals, reflected in families. That you've got families where there are kids roughly my age, millennials, that the parents absolutely love Trump, can't get enough of him, support him, back him no matter what he does, no matter how dumb it is. And then you've got the millennials that are saying, he does stuff like this. That is an absolute repudiation, flies in the face of everything my parents taught me. And yet they're supporting him without any questions or qualifiers. You want to know why millennials don't just eat Trump up with a spoon the way a lot of the older generation does? That's why. That right there. Look, I am a fan of sticking it to the media and slapping them in the face in front of everybody to see. And I mean that, of course, rhetorically. I hate that I even have to qualify that now. But I mean, verbally bashing them. That's what I'm talking about. And Trump is dang good at it. But not everything has to be about that. And that shouldn't be the primary purpose of your presidency. And you look at Donald Trump's record. So far, even though he's had funds released to build the wall, he hasn't started construction on it yet, even though he got the okay from the Supreme Court to go ahead and start construction on that. We have very little difference in the border policy and the status of the border now that we had in the Obama years. We've got higher deficits, higher spending, more spending than Obama ever dreamed of. I mean, do we have a really great Supreme Court justice in Gorsuch? And I guess an okay one in Kavanaugh? Yeah, I'll give him that. Moving the capital of Jerusalem to Israel? Yep, should have done that 30 years ago. Trump gets all the credit for that. But is that it? I mean, got a booming economy. Trump has had something to do with that. I'm not saying that the guy has been an absolute abysmal failure, but I'm saying, are you really willing to put up with garbage like that? I mean, an absolute dumpster fire for a handful of policy initiatives? Because I got to say, and I actually was thinking earlier this week, contemplating to myself, if the election were held today, would I vote for Trump? And I was seriously considering it because you all know I didn't vote for him the first time, largely because of his moral failings and because of the kind of person that he is. And I thought about it, I was like, he's done a lot more good than bad in terms of, I thought that he was going to be basically Hillary Clinton light, and he wound up being a lot more conservative than that. But it's hard to put up with garbage like this when the sole purpose of the man's presidency seems to be to bolster his own ego and to put himself first. And that even when you're dealing with victims of a mass shooting, the guy sees it as merely an opportunity to bolster his own popularity. America deserves a better president than that. They just do. We do. And I don't know that even if he had this job for another 3 decades that we would ever get that from President Trump. America deserves better. And we're dealing with this guy. The message of the president, when tragedy strikes this country the way it does, it's got to be deeper than, hey, look at me and how great I am. And it's got to be better than, look at how I'm sticking it to the media and how wrong the media is. At a time like this, that should have been the furthest thing from President Trump's mind. But because of the kind of man that he is, it was the only thing on his mind. I'm not saying he doesn't care about the victims. I'm not saying there's not any genuine compassion coming out of him. But the point is, in his mind, he was there to stick it to the media and to put the spotlight on him and to show everybody how great he was. That was his primary goal. And that kind of level of pride, I can't even deal with thinking about somebody in the White House that actually believes that. You remember the story of the Good Samaritan? You remember the part of the Good Samaritan where he gets out to save the guy there stuck on that's been robbed on the side of the road, and he says, "Hang on a second, I got to pull out my selfie stick so that we can take a picture and I can upload it." Do you remember, to put it in terms of that day, him going throughout the town right after he put the guy up in the hotel and telling everybody what he had done? No. Because in that parable, the Samaritan was only concerned with his neighbor that needed help. At a time like this, America needs the president to be a voice of reason and unification. And frankly, in his speech, I wouldn't say that it was great, but he was largely that. But when he actually went out to meet the victims, you get mess like that. And that's not okay. It's the same thing with, you'll remember the story about the Pharisees and the rich people that were giving out of their alms and giving in abundance, and they were making a big show. They would go up, and it was almost like the sort of idea that is given from that passage in the Gospels is that these people were going up and basically giving like you would give to the telethon, where they've got the big video board and, hey, this is how much I'm giving. And then you've got a poor widow who throws 2 mites in. Doesn't make a big show, but she's the one that actually sacrificed to do the right thing. Trump can't do anything, seemingly, without making it into a production, making it all about himself and his own greatness. He wants to make it a temple, a testament to the greatness that is Donald Trump. And this video is Exhibit A. He seems utterly incapable of doing something good unless the main takeaway from it is how much credit he's going to get for it. And the country just deserves a better leader than that. This video is essentially every bad thing about Donald Trump rolled into one. We'll go to a break.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post. Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. And now for a reading from the SJW Bible. Today's reading will be from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7, verses 2 through 10. And a centurion's slave was sick and about to die. When he had heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come save the life of his slave. When they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built our synagogue." Now Jesus was triggered upon hearing this and said, "None of the good things he has done matter, because he is a slave owner, and we must never admit that anyone that ever owned slaves is capable of doing anything good. Furthermore, instead of asking me for help, you should have passed universal health care by now so that he could receive treatment for free." Then Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying, "Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I am also a man placed under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my slave, 'Do this,' and he does it." Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him, and turned and said to the crowd that was following him, "I say to you, this man is engaged in systematic oppression. He is clearly engaging in wage slavery by controlling the means of production to exploit the labor of those around him." Then Jesus gathered up a mob and protested on the centurion's lawn all night long, with torches and signs reading, "Down with the patriarchy," terrifying him and his family. We never really found out what happened to the centurion's slave. Wow. So inspiring. Thank you for listening to this reading of the SJW Bible, and remember, the only truth that matters is your truth.
And welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us through the break. Let's go straight to the daily dose of stupid.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
Ah, yes, today's daily dose of stupid, and this one actually comes to you from CNN's very own Chris Cuomo, because Chris Cuomo is talking guns, and whenever that happens, you see a torrential downpour of stupid. Now, you may be sitting there and asking, Caleb, how is it in a week where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez goes on a long and hilarious rant about white supremacy that Chris Cuomo is the subject of your daily dose of stupid? Well, it's just that stupid. I considered AOC. I thought about it. It was a tough call. But ultimately, Chris Cuomo on guns is dumber than AOC on white supremacy. I'm sorry. AOC's got to step up her game if she wants to get back in the daily dose of stupid, and I'm certain that she will before long. But this week, it has to be the dumber of the Cuomo brothers, Chris Cuomo on CNN. So let's go ahead and check this out. This is Chris Cuomo at the town hall for CNN talking about the NRA and them being invited to this town hall. So check this out.
We also invited the National Rifle Association, the NRA, to be part of tonight's conversation. They declined. They sent a totally disingenuous statement that they're open to honest discussion, but not this spectacle. That's what you call this, a spectacle? I guess they want to do their talking with propaganda ads and millions in lobbying. Besides, let's be honest, the gun lobby is not going to be the answer. And that shouldn't be expected any more than we expected big tobacco to help us expose the ills of smoking. The reality is, people like you are the answer. And there can be no sides when it comes to wanting to be safer, better protected. There just can't be. Not anymore.
All right, so several great points coming from Chris Cuomo, the dumber of the Cuomo brothers there. So in this town hall, he specifically goes after the NRA for declining to show up. Now, you guys know that I am a big proponent of free speech and having a honest conversation, talking, giving a back and forth, and presenting your ideas as a foil, as a difference from your opponent and trying to hash out which one is better based on an open dialogue. None of that applies here, and here's why. Yes, the Parkland Town Hall, remember that happened right after Parkland, the shooting in the Parkland High School at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. That thing was an absolute spectacle. And so when Chris Cuomo is all offended by all right, that's what you call this, a spectacle? Yes. Did you watch the CNN town hall after Parkland? The spectacle is tame compared to what I would call it. It was a bloodbath. And not a bloodbath because the points they were making were better. It was like the 2 minutes of hate from 1984. That's what it resembled. The whole purpose of the event, from its inception to its execution, was they designed every aspect of it in such a way to make gun rights advocates look as terrible as possible, to look like horrible people that don't care when children die. That's what the whole thing was set up for. The game is rigged. And when you know for a fact that the game is rigged, there is no reason for you to play. I mean, let's take it into something completely apolitical. Let's say that Auburn and Alabama decided this year at the Iron Bowl, Alabama said, all right, Auburn, you're going to come to Bryant-Denny this year, and just so you know, we're only going to allow you 6 players on the field at any given time. And by the way, you have to go the full 100 yards to get a touchdown. Alabama will score a touchdown every time they get past the 20. Well, of course, Auburn would say, no, we're not doing that. Or if it were reversed. I mean, if you're an Alabama fan, reverse it and imagine the same thing. When you know the game is rigged, when you know that it's designed specifically to make you lose, there is no reason for you to show up. And what's hilarious is that Chris Cuomo basically becomes the mean girl. You remember that movie, Mean Girls? I mean, he basically becomes a high school mean girl, in which the girl would invite another girl that she doesn't like to a party or some kind of event, specifically with the intention of humiliating her. And then that happens. And then the next time she invites the girl to a party, she says, well, you know, she's just a slut and she's just a coward and she doesn't want to come. No, you designed the whole thing specifically to make them look bad. And then you get mad when they don't show up for you to dump on them. That's what happened here. And when it comes to this, it's hilarious because Chris Cuomo proves the NRA's point. Basically in the same breath that he just repudiated them for not wanting to show up for the conversation. He admits in that clip, well, they don't have anything valuable to say. Well, the answers aren't going to come from the gun lobby. So you're admitting right there on air after saying that you're mad at them for not showing up, that, well, they don't have any of the answers, so it's better that they're not here anyway. You didn't want to have an honest conversation. You didn't want to hear what they had to say. You didn't want to discuss the issues. You wanted them to show up so that you could dump on them. That's the only reason that you wanted them there. And when it comes to this, he says that, well, the answers aren't going to come from the gun lobby because we wouldn't expect them to help us any more than we would expect the tobacco industry to give us an answer when it comes to the dangers of smoking. I forget exactly how he worded it. Yeah, here's the thing. When did a cigarette ever prevent lung cancer? Anyone? Anybody? Can anybody point me to the cigarette that actually stopped a person from getting sick? Because if you can't, then it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison. Are guns used in evil ways by evil people to hurt people? Yeah, that happens. This is an example of it. But there is never, at any point in the use of tobacco, has any form of tobacco ever used to actually prevent someone from getting lung cancer. And in the case of a gun, we know from that CDC study that I was citing earlier, 3 to 5 times the rate of gun crime are guns used for their correct purpose in defensive use of firearms. And so it's really no comparison here. But there are another thing that he said there at the end that kind of stuck in my craw. he just said that, well, there are no sides to wanting to be safer. I agree. There's nobody in this world that I'm aware of that wants to be not safe. But do you know what I do to make sure that I and the people around me are safe? I carry a gun. And anybody that wants to make that process of me owning a gun so that I can protect the loved ones around me, anybody that wants to inhibit that, I see that person as a danger. And so you can't say, well, when it comes to this, we all want to be safer. What he means by that is we should all want there to be no guns. That's what he's saying. No, I want a gun, and I disagree with you specifically because I do want to be safer. Look, people on the right and people on the left, even though I disagree with the left, and you can see the hours and hours of footage I've done explaining why, I get that we both want to be safe. We have different answers to what will make us safer. The left, I believe mistakenly, believes that taking away guns is going to make them safer. The right believes that adding guns, or at least keeping them at the level that they are, is more likely to keep us safer. And so this whole disingenuous thing where he's trying to be like, well, the NRA just wants you to not be safe. If the NRA or any gun advocate, do you really think that they would want their customers to not be safer? Because if your customer base dies, that kind of hurts business. Even if you believe that they were just these evil, greedy capitalists that cared nothing about their customers and only wanted to make money, well, they would still have a profit incentive for their customers to, be alive. Dead people don't have gun rights. They're dead. And so, even if you believe that they didn't care about people, if you just believe they care about profit, your argument still doesn't make sense. But anyway, this is not the only thing that Chris Cuomo said that was incredibly stupid about this whole thing. I mean, you saw right there, he says, I don't think the NRA has anything profitable to say. They just want to do all their talking through propaganda. Again, proving the NRA was right, proving their own point directly after saying that they didn't want to show up and repudiating them for that. He proves their point by saying, this was going to be totally biased if they showed up. He proves why NRA was wise to stay away from that town hall. But anyway, this is the other side of that. Chris Cuomo tweeted out something about the Second Amendment, and this just proves that Cuomo is one of the worst possible people you could get to host a gun town hall because he knows nothing about it. And this is proof of that. Here's a tweet from earlier this week by Chris Cuomo. So he says, do you remember what the 2A Second Amendment was created for? That there was no individual right contemplated until Scalia read it in? If you are an originalist about the Constitution, you have no basis for thinking you and not the state controls access. Anybody that has studied this issue for more than 10 consecutive seconds knows this is a load of crap. Even extremely far left liberal justices, I mean way on the left, wouldn't say that nobody even contemplated an individual right to own guns before Scalia in the Hiller case in 2004 decided in the prevailing opinion that that was the case. Now, you could say that Scalia's opinion, which I would say that it predates Scalia's opinion by quite a few years, the founding of our country, but you could say that Scalia is the one that solidified it, but that school of thought existed way before Scalia just came up with it. But the thing is, I guess Chris Cuomo believes that history actually started in 2004 because he kind of missed that, about 200-year span between the Constitution and 2004 where everybody assumed that you did have an individual right to own guns. This is well documented in the entire history of the court. And again, I've done so many videos on the Second Amendment and gun rights. Feel free to go through those for more confirmation of it. But since Chris Cuomo is going to pull the originalist card, okay, let's go to originalism. Let's look at what the founders, what the people that actually wrote the Bill of Rights had to say about it. Let's go first to George Mason. George Mason is regarded as the father of the Bill of Rights. While James Madison actually penned the Bill of Rights and he penned the Constitution as well, it was George Mason, an anti-federalist, that insisted that a Bill of Rights be included or it would lose his support, and eventually he thought that it was actually not good enough, not anti-federalist enough for him to sign off on. George Mason never signed the Constitution. But George Mason was so incredibly instrumental to the crafting of the Bill of Rights that he's regarded widely as the father of the Bill of Rights. Even Thomas Jefferson talked about how instrumental he was to the Bill of Rights being included in the Constitution and eventually being ratified. This is George Mason. I ask, who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people except a few public officers. And this is George Mason in his address to the Virginia Ratifying Convention on June the 4th, 1788. So this is how the argument usually goes from people in Chris Cuomo's line of thinking, that Justice Scalia just invented the individual right. They're saying, well, because it talks about a well-regulated militia in the Second Amendment, even though this is completely misreading intentionally the intent of the Second Amendment. They'll say, well, it's talking about the militia there. It's not talking about the individuals, not talking about citizens. Yeah, well, George Mason, the guy that is the reason we have a Bill of Rights, just said that the militia consists of the whole people, so that kind of pokes a pretty big hole in your argument. And what's hilarious about that is that their position is only public officers, in other words, only military, standing army, that those are the people that should have guns. What did George Mason say at the end of that quote? Except for a few public officers. Mason is specifically saying that the only people that aren't militia are people that are in a standing army. The exact opposite of Chris Cuomo's position. In fact, this would have been the common understanding of what a militia was at the time of the writing of the Constitution. You had standing army and then militia. We won the war largely with the militia. We had a standing army too, but it was mostly volunteer soldiers that were not formally in the actual standing army. They were just volunteers that joined the militia, which by definition are people that are not a member of a standing army. They're regular citizens. But if that's not good enough for you, let's look at another quote by George Mason. That a well-regulated militia, composed of the body of the people, trained to arms, is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. That standing armies, in times of peace, should be avoided as dangerous to liberty, and that, in all cases, the military should be under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. That is in the Virginia Declaration of Rights from June the 12th, 1776, which, by the way, became a template for the Constitution about 10 years later. George Mason copied a lot of his work and should have. But you notice again, this is George Mason saying that the militia is the people, and specifically contrast that with the military. He's saying that the well-regulated militia, he doesn't even use well-regulated in that one. Oh yeah, he does. The well-regulated militia, which he says are the regular citizens, which he expounds upon and explains, they're the ones that keep the military in check to keep them from being tyrannical. You really think that we're going to be able to do that with fishing pikes? No. Mason is specifically pointing out a contrast in the military and the regular people which constitute the militia. So if you want to go down the originalist route, Chris Cuomo, feel free to. I'll do that all day. But maybe George Mason's not enough for you. Well, let's go to the guy that actually penned the Bill of Rights. Granted, copying mostly from George Mason's work, but let's go to James Madison. James Madison said this: besides the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, the existence of subordinate governments to which the people are attached, and by which the militia officers are appointed, forms a barrier against the enterprises of ambition, more insurmountable than any which a simple government of any form can admit of. James Madison from the Federalist, number 46, on January 29th, 1788. James Madison reflecting the exact same sentiments as George Mason, saying that it's the average citizen that is supposed to possess arms, and specifically the fact that Americans possess more arms than any other is what makes it virtually impossible to conquer us. Because it's not just our military. And any government, whether it's our own or whether it's a foreign one, it would be nearly impossible for them to conquer us specifically because we have guns. And we have more of them than any other country. All right, let's look at another quote from Madison. The ultimate authority, by the way, this is in that same Federalist 46, so he's still talking about guns in the Second Amendment here. The ultimate authority, wherever the derivative may be found, resides in the people alone. Again, the people are the militia. The people are the ones that retain the power to have a Second Amendment to be able to bear arms. Another quote by James Madison. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the best and most natural defense of a free country. James Madison from the Annals of Congress 434, June 8, 1789. Now, you may notice there, if you remember the quote from George Mason a little bit earlier, that sounds very much derivative of that. Again, that's because Madison largely copied Mason's work. And there you have it, where he expounds upon, basically, this is the original rough draft of the Second Amendment. It's just a little bit longer, it's a little less concise, where he says that the well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, regular citizens, normal people, not armies. And so this idea that Cuomo is trying to peddle that, oh, well, the Second Amendment doesn't guarantee a right to the individual, just to militias. Yeah, you idiot, militias are the people. And we have that well documented. Look, I could go on and on about this. I could go on with several different founders and their quotes on it. But for the sake of time and today, we'll just leave you with the two men that were most important to crafting the Bill of Rights, George Mason and James Madison. And they both very clearly believed that the militia was the average person, and that average person had an absolute God-given right to keep and bear arms. And they did so specifically to keep out the threat of a government, foreign or domestic, from taking them over. But here's the thing, even if we didn't have those quotes, even if we had none of that from Madison and George Mason, the argument still makes no sense. Absolutely none. Because if that's the case, what Chris Cuomo is asking you to believe is that the founders are so incredibly stupid, no, rather that they believe that you are so incredibly stupid that when the founders were getting together and thinking, we've got to put together a Bill of Rights. We have to let the people know what their rights are in this new republic that we founded. What do we need to put in there? Well, how about freedom of religion? Great. How about freedom of speech? Excellent. How about the freedom to congregate or to petition your government? Absolutely good. How about not having having soldiers quartered in your private dwelling? Yeah, that's a good one. How about property rights? Absolutely. By the way, we should also probably include that a little disclaimer that just so you know, when you send troops into a battlefield, they should probably have guns. That's what Chris Cuomo is asking you to believe, that the founders thought you were so incredibly dumb that you had to be told, hey, when you're sending troops into battle, send them in with weapons. Don't just send them in with nothing. That's the argument. That's the argument that Chris Cuomo thinks you are dumb enough to actually believe. That the founders thought it was important to include instructions. Hey, when you guys are fighting battles in the future, please give your military members, please give them a gun on the way out so they're not just, running into gunfire. Because that's the only other way that what Chris Cuomo is saying makes sense. Why would this be the only right out of all of them? Because, I mean, nobody says that free speech should only be allowed for certain people. Nobody is saying that freedom of the press ought to be only allowed to certain people, well, except maybe some people at CNN, so maybe Chris Cuomo is on board with that one. Nobody is saying that these rights only exist for a certain class of people, except all of a sudden when it becomes the Second Amendment, okay, well, that one is only addressing some of the citizens. It's not addressing everybody. Why would that be the only one that they included that wasn't universal? Their argument makes absolutely no sense. But this isn't the only dumb thing Chris Cuomo has said about guns. So normally I don't do this. I just take my commentary from the clips themselves. But Steven Crowder did such a great example of why Chris Cuomo is not to be believed when it comes to guns. I had to show this clip. So this is from Louder with Crowder, which, by the way, check him out. Great political commentator. This is from Louder with Crowder the other night, where he was showing a contrast between the motives of the shooters and how Chris Cuomo covered him. So back when we were looking at the shooter that we believed was motivated by white nationalism, the one that was shooting the Walmart in El Paso, at that point, it was really important to understand his motive and exactly why he did what he did. And then Chris Cuomo was singing a very different tune when it's a guy that was a socialist that supported Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And this is Steven Crowder explaining that.
Here's the DNC pool boy in chief, Chris Cuomo, taking the moral high ground in covering the Dayton shooting.
I don't talk about who these killers are. I don't want to get into their biography. They are irrelevant in terms of why they did this and who helped them.
We don't want to get into their motive or their background? Really, Mr. DNC pool boy in chief?
Here's the easy part. A white nationalist coward who kills people to motivate a political cause is no different than an ISIS coward doing the same thing. They are both terrorists. Wow. And you know it.
When it comes to El Paso, I guess we're a little bit murky in the DNC rule book. So that's how he covers Dayton, and then El Paso.
I mean, I can't say it any more concisely than Crowder did. You see his coverage of El Paso. Well, the important thing to know here, the big takeaway is that this was an evil white nationalist, which, by the way, it was. I'm not disputing that. But all of a sudden, when it's an ideology that's kind of on his side, you know, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, somebody that supported those kind of people, motive doesn't matter. We shouldn't even take that into consideration. I don't care. The only thing that we should know about this guy is that he's an evil person that wanted to take someone's life. Yeah, but that's not what you were saying about the shooting that happened, 13 hours earlier. You see, the standard changes based on whose wheels get greased. The standard changes based on who this political narrative might hurt. Now, I've been consistent on this. I don't blame Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren for the act of one crazy person. But I also don't blame Donald Trump for the actions of the other crazy person. And I think that their motives are not the only takeaway. I do think that they're important to understand. But in both cases, you had one guy that was an ardent Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren supporter, and somebody that absolutely despised the right. And then in the other case, you have an alt-right white nationalist who in his own manifesto said that people are going to say this is because I'm supporting Trump. I'm not. The guy was a white nationalist. Yeah, he really didn't like Latino people. And he also really didn't like Donald Trump. And he was also an eco-terrorist. Believed that Latinos were using up too much resources. And the reason we had to defeat them and take them out and exterminate them is because we can't deal with global warming. That's the story that the media isn't going to tell you. And that's the difference in Chris Cuomo, a guy who has said in the past, by the way, that when it comes to gangs like Antifa, their violence isn't as bad because they're fighting against fascist and white nationalists. You can look it up. I've done segments on it. You can look up the clip yourself. Trying to make excuses for violence as long as it's violence from somebody coming from his side. The thing is, Chris Cuomo has absolutely no objectivity in him whatsoever. There are other people at CNN that, though they sometimes kind of lean left, like Anderson Cooper, you can tell that they're at least trying to remain objective. Chris Cuomo's like, screw it, I'm an activist. Does not care. Still claims that he's a journalist, pretends to be objective, But he does it all so that he can continue to push his agenda unimpeded by people saying, well, you're just an activist or you're just a political commentator, even though that's 100% exactly what he is. All right, let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Welcome back. And Chaplain's Report today really comes in a lot of ways from the mindset that I was in when I was putting this show together. Because we saw from the very beginning, whether it was Elizabeth Warren and Doug Jones, moving on a little bit further, whether it was Trump and the people that are going to excuse his bad behavior regardless of what stupid thing that he does next, or when it comes to Chris Cuomo, who is fine covering a killer's ideology when it's somebody that he thinks is going to help his narrative, but ignores it and actually says that we shouldn't consider it at all when it's something that actually might hurt his narrative. I'm just so sick of the double standards on both sides. It absolutely drives me up a wall. And maybe it's because I was raised to think that consistency matters, that giving people a fair shake regardless of where they're coming from or whether you like them or not matters. But I think a lot of it does have to do with my Christian worldview, and that really comes down to there's no better place to see that than in the book of James. So in James 2, 4-9, have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil motives? Listen, my beloved brethren, did not God choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Is it not the rich who oppress you and personally drag you into court? Do they not blaspheme the fair name by which you have been called? If, however, you are fulfilling the royal law according to the Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing well. But if you show partiality, you are committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. Important thing to understand in really grasping what's going on in that passage is that they were giving respect to certain people based on how much they liked them or what they could do for them. The early church had a real problem with this. They were seeing members that were particularly affluent, very wealthy, and they were thinking, these guys are kind of pillars of the community. They make us look really good, and we really need them. And so we're going to kind of put them in a place of prestige. We're going to hold them up. That's not something that you do in God's kingdom. Because the whole purpose of Christianity is that everybody stands equal before God. That nobody, regardless of who they are, is worthy to come into God's presence, and so that we all empty ourselves and put on the mantle of Christ through coming in contact with his blood and being forgiven of our sins, and that God looks on him and not us, and that's the only way that we can be found worthy. Doesn't matter who we are. Doesn't matter if we're somebody that grew up in the church our entire life and led what most people would consider a Christian life for the entirety, all the way through childhood, gone to church our whole life, or we were somebody that was just a low life, in prison. When you put on that mantle of Christ, doesn't matter. And that's what's important about Christianity, is that we understand that. But here were people in the Lord's church that were seeing certain people that they thought were a better face for the church, that gave them prominent positions, that put them in the place of honor, and they were ignoring the poor people because, well, they couldn't do as much for them, they felt. You see, that's an attitude that cannot exist among God's people. It just can't. And that's the reason that James is pointing this out. He's saying, look, you've got the entire message of the gospel backwards if that's what you're worried about. You're not taking into consideration what your actions are actually doing. And I've always heard, and it's a really good saying, it's not biblical, but it is a good saying, that if you really want to understand a person's character, watch how they treat a person that can't do anything for them. In other words, what is at the core of that idea is that when a person, how do they react when they know they're not getting anything in return? Do they still choose to do good even though they know that there's no reward coming for them? Because if that is the case, then that's a person of real character. That's the kind of person that God wants to bless because they are doing his will. And that's something that unfortunately the Christians in James had lost. Now, I want you to understand something about that passage too. You'll notice that James' answer to this is not, well, now you got to be mean to the rich guy. It's not what he said at all. He said you're supposed to be treating people equally. So he's not saying the way to treat them equally is to now hold up the poor person and then talk about how terrible the rich person is and how bad that person is and repudiate them. Not what James said. He said, these are your brothers in Christ. You need to treat them equally. You don't need to be a respecter of persons and be guilty of the sin of partiality, which he regards in that passage as a sin. Holding out favorites. If there is anything that is true, especially of the Old Testament, picking favorites doesn't work for anybody. Doesn't work for humans. And when it comes to God, he does not tolerate it in his children. For the same reason that a parent can't stand it when his child is nasty or mean or doesn't show the adequate respect to one of his siblings that he's supposed to, because that's their children. God hates to see us fight as well, and he especially hates it when we treat his children in a way that we wouldn't want to be treated. That's really what's at the core of this whole thing. We have to treat each other as equals. We have to treat each other as if we're all valuable. Because isn't that what the teaching of Christ was all about? If you look at, for example, Matthew 25, what is the mark of a Christian person? What distinguishes a person that is saved from a person that is lost? Several things, but what's emphasized in that passage, the thing that Jesus brings up as the most important thing, is how they treated other people. If you treated your brothers and sisters like you would have treated me, that's a person that belongs in the church. That's a lamb of God. That's someone that belongs in the kingdom that is ruled by Jesus Christ. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.